this evening we are going to be listening to Dr. Ray Brassieur and Becca Begnaud, and they will talk about the traiteur tradition here in the Acadiana area, and we're just so pleased to have all of you here. I'd like to bring up Ann Laughlin so that she's with Vermilionville, and she can welcome you to Vermilionville.
Hi, I'm Ann Laughlin, and welcome to Vermilionville. We're happy to have you here tonight. We're so happy to have both Becca Begnaud and Dr. Ray Brassieur. I don't know if y'all know this, but Dr. Ray is the president of the Vermilionville Foundation Board here, and he helps us out with a lot of things and making sure that we're doing our jobs right and doing right by our great cultures of this area. So we're happy that the Foundation Board is part of this event, and I think it's fitting that Ray is one of the presenters for the first in the series, and of course, we always keep our ties close to Becca as well. I don't know if this would be a little known fact, but she has also worked at Vermilionville at different times through the years, so we're happy to have her back home tonight as well. So I'm gonna go ahead and give it back to Jennifer or Michael. I'll give it to Michael.
Hey, good evening, everyone. My name is Michael Laverne, and I'm a student at the university in history, and I work with Jennifer at the Center for Cultural and Ecotourism. And some of you may or may not know that we house the archives of Cajun and Creole folklore. So this is a topic that is very close to our hearts, and especially for me. My grandfather was a traiteur, and unfortunately, his gift died with him. So it's just a topic that I've always been interested in, and I think that tonight will help all of us to better understand it, and maybe we can make some connections that we can take with us from here on out. So I'd like to introduce to you Dr. Ray Brassieur, and he's a associate professor at the University in anthropology, and he's a foremost authority on many things Cajun and Acadian. So if you can give him a round of applause, we'd appreciate that.
Thank you very much, Michael. Yes, I'm glad there are some, when you have a thing like this, you want to make sure and have an expert, just as Michael said. Fortunately, we have a room full of experts, and I'm not talking about me. There are some people who really know in this room right now, and I appreciate that, and whatever I end up saying tonight, I hope they are there to center me, set me straight, put me on the right path, because this is a topic that we can't oversimplify, but we often do, and it's complex. There's a lot to it. I'd like to echo just for a second, though, some thanks again to the Center for Culture and Ecotourism, and for Jennifer Ritter, whose idea this was, this lecture series. Her idea. This is a unit of the University of Louisiana at Lafayette, the Center for Culture and Ecotourism. Her idea to put on this lecture series, and we really appreciate that. And this is the kind of thing that Vermilionville wants to do and should do. And we like to see on a cold winter night, people come in and warm it up. That's what we need to do, and this is the kind of thing. I think the series is just excellent. We're proud as the foundation to be supporting and to co-sponsor this thing too. So that's some of my other hats there that I'm wearing. I'm happy to have a chance to wear those. The title of this talk, which I didn't put on the screen, and I don't have a copy of it, but it has to do with, it has in the title, homeopathy. And I know that at least one of you were drawn by that title, because we have an expert in homeopathy that's come here tonight, and there may be others as well. It's a very interesting topic. I don't think it's dead center in what Louisiana folk tradition is, necessarily, but I think that homeopathy has some real technical meaning. It has a technical meaning of what it is, and I did make an attempt to let's see, take a shot at it, and let's see how well I did with it. Homeopathy has a technical meaning. So we know who it was, or at least we're told who it was that came up with the idea to create this field of homeopathy as an approach to therapy and to treatment. Samuel Hahnemann was a German, and he did his work mostly in the late 18th century and into the 19th century. He lived, I think, close to the mid part of the 19th century. The idea of homeopathy caught on to a certain extent around Europe. It did transfer wider into the U.S., into the North American and American continents. It became popular during the 19th century to a certain extent at least, competing as it was with some other methods of treatment and medicine that might have been more dominant all the time, but at one point it ran out of popularity at one point during the 20th century. Then it was revived again, and in the 1960s or 70s or sometime or another, it became very interested. And so now we can go to the drugstore and we see a lot of homeopathic remedies there. What does that have to do with Cajun folk healing? I think that's a complex question. They may share some roots, ancient roots and ideas. They might. For example, Samuel Hahnemann believed in the cure of similars, the law of similars, which one way to state it was like cures like. And so the Latin way to say it, similia similibus curantur, is said, sometimes used to refer to homeopathic concepts, and sometimes used to refer to magic, because ancient magic also relied upon, in some parts, this idea of like controls like. That's one of the principles of magic that has been recorded and documented from way back, and it still exists today. And it might work in Louisiana, and it might be part of what became folk tradition here too. For example, this cure right here, Rus tox, I don't know if that's how you say it, Rus tox. Okay, undoubtedly what this cure does, it has a little bit of, and a fraction, small part of poison ivy in it, so that when it was taken by a person who was afflicted with poison ivy, it would cure it. Well, that's the idea, that's the concept. So did that work with Cajun folk tradition here or not? Well, I've heard, St. Martin Parish, I've heard people tell me, you want to cure poison ivy, you're going to eat 9 seeds or 7 seeds or whatever. It has to be a magic number of them, whatever it is. And once you've eaten those, you're not going to have it again. So maybe there is this principle might be there in that sense. And we're going to see some other examples that might come close to homeopathy as we go on. But there's a whole lot in Cajun folk curing, not Cajun, but in folk curing of South Louisiana, there's a lot of other influences that have come in. And that's another thing that we're going to explore a little bit in our talk. For example, my uncle had a cure for poison ivy, and what he suggested that worked was you have to find the poison ivy that actually got on you, so the one that affected you, find it, go to the tree where it is, and when you find it, urinate on it. So that's a different concept of magic that he was using. He swore that it worked. He said, but he never could get his wife to do it for some reason. Never did get it. So anyway, there's a lot of different ideas. And so this is, I know, real simple. I didn't know who would come tonight. And I know there's some real experts and also some French speakers here tonight. Many of you know what this is and don't have to wonder a question about it. But some, it might help just to go over these terms. Traitement. Traitement is treatment, okay? It's a system of treatment. Traitement, when we talk about traitement. Traiteur is the treater, but a male treater. That's the one, if the treater is a male, if the treater is a female, it's a traiteuse. Traiteuse or a traiteur. So that it can be conflict, because in French, we have to use a different word depending on the gender, and in English, we'd use the same word no matter what the gender might be. And often also we hear the term faith healer associated with folk traditions in South Louisiana. Is it the same thing? Maybe it is. Maybe there is, in some forms of traitement, a large dose of faith healing that's going on there. And maybe it's not. But traitement is bigger than just faith healing. Traitement includes some other things that's not just about faith. And that's what we're going to talk about, what all it might include if we find out, because there's a lot of different examples in Louisiana that we can find, and variations. There's a lot of them. One thing I like to think about when I think about traitement is that it's not just a set of cures, but it is a system, a health system. What I would call it an ethno-medical system. So as a system, it includes not only the cure or the therapies that you would apply to whatever problem it might be, but what about the causes and what can cause illness? So I'm talking about the people who believe in traitement and who work with traitement, who either are clients or they receive treatment or else they give treatment. They have beliefs about sickness. Where did that sickness come from? What can provide it? So is it microbes? You know, is it small microscopic little things that come into your body and do the damage? Is it a spirit from another realm? Is it God's will? What is it that causes disease? Is it the cold weather that causes disease? Anyway, so it's a system. And you have to, if you want to understand traitement, you have to understand what they believe causes the sickness too. It's part of the story. Who diagnoses an illness is part of it. The person that recognizes it and that can tell. And there are some conditions that only specialists can tell you what it is. Of course, that's like that in the medical profession, the biomedical profession that we go to with the doctors. They have diagnosticians who know, they can tell what's the problem, and they're specialists at it. You could have specialists in the folk field too, like that. It's part of the system. And then what's the appropriate therapy? Who can diagnose? Who can apply therapy? Under whose authority? Is it the knowledge? Is it the skill of the person who's actually applying the therapy? Or where does the power come from? Where is the seat of the healing power? So it's really a belief system that we're talking about. And many people may believe that it has to do with the spirit world, and it's God. Okay, so if you think that in traitement, in Louisiana traitement, that the real healer is God, and that the treater is just a pass-through for the power of God that goes to the treater, and the treater channels that power to therapy. But there's some other treaters in Louisiana who might believe that it's one or another spirit that's not God. We have a complex culture in Louisiana, and we have influences that have come from Africa. We have influences that were here natively, and those things exist too. So anyway, we'll try to get a broadest idea of what traitement might be that we come across. Is it Cajun? Maybe most of you, if it was a democratic process and I would ask you all, is traitement Cajun? Well, you would tell me probably statistically, yes. So I could, well, okay, yep. But is it Cajun? George Rodriguez said it's Cajun. Okay, Cajun faith healer. He didn't know it was a traiteurs, though. So I don't know. But what kind of treaters could we find in Louisiana? Well, there's some Indians who are treaters. And take a look at this group here called the Bayou Healers, group from of the Homa Native American group. They're tribal people. And look what they say about it, how important it is to them, healing. They traditionally, and maybe today, have an idea of medicine that's completely different from what some of us might think of as medicine, by the way, what medicine is, what healing is. But they're looking to their youth, formed on the belief that today's Indian children will be the healing generation for all Indian people. So anyway, they have an idea too. So if we think it's just Cajun, well, maybe not. Also Plain. This is the name of groups, musical groups, that I'm able to collect in a short time off the internet that play in Louisiana. Who are these guys? The traiteurs, well, we know them, I know them. So they're Cajun, I see those guys are Cajun. Okay, the treaters, they're Homa Indians. How about the Bayou Healers? They're Indians. How about Big Frank and the Healers? I don't know Big Frank. But I don't know if he's Cajun. He could very well be African American, it could be Creole, I don't know. The Mighty Blue Healers, I doubt if they're Cajun. Luther and the Healers, nah, I don't think. Louisiana Medicine Man, I don't know. How about sweet medicine music? Dr. John and Hoodoo Moon? He took his name from a healer. Dr. John did. Dr. John, the great musician, from a healer, but it wasn't a Cajun. And the traitement that he applied was not necessarily Cajun either. And of course, Mojo Hand, the Hoodoo Kings, Big Bad. This is what's in popular culture today, but where did it come from? Well, it comes from the mind. It comes from what's popular. It comes from what's interesting. People are interested in this, and it still exists today. It comes out. So anyway, it's a complex topic, say the least. If you ever have a chance to see Glenn Pete's movie, you'll see that it actually does have a number of different origins, that what we might think of as traitement today could certainly come from different places. And the Cajuns practice this, but here's some black people that are doing it too. Some Indians do it. Some Spanish people, Canary Islanders also treat. There's just quite a number of people who come from different heritages, different traditions that treat in Louisiana. So what is it? The best way I can describe it is not a simple way at all. So what I've tried to do is to construct a continuum that tries to represent the variation of traitement that we might find in Louisiana, because there's some variation in that. And on one side of it, on the far right, traitement that I think many of you probably are familiar with and maybe practice it or know about it. It has to do with prayer and we might call it prayer healing. And it doesn't generally, or it might not, use any other kind of tool. No drugs, no pills, no plants, no other thing at all besides that prayer, and maybe some gestures. And later on, Becca is going to tell us about it, and others might join in too to tell us about what kind of things they could have. But prayer is central to it, and that's what does the healing, apparently, on that end of the spectrum. But also, there are some religio magic, and I'm going to show you some examples of this that are not only prayer. There's something else going on. There's some charms, there's some items that are used, and also. And then there's some that I'll just call magic. It's going pretty far away from prayer that most of us would think of as associated with established religious prayer, but it may have some religious overtones, it may have some charms, it might have some, and we'll see. There's some things in Louisiana. And then on the far other side, the natural curatives. These are people who take plants and they use them, not necessarily with prayer at all, but they know what plant helps a certain kind of thing. Now, any particular healer that we might find or talk to may fit anywhere along this continuum. He might be closer towards the faith healing, or he may be all across the line. He might use a bit of all of it. So it's trying to understand the variation in it. Now the prayer healing, and we're glad to have Becca with us today, and some of you are very interested in this, I know. There's a variation in this too. So there are some rules that go along with the prayer healing that happens at Traitement. There's some rules. It's just that they're just like any other kind of rules. Some people follow them and some people don't. Some people follow a different set of rules. The rules have variation too, but there are some general rules that we can talk about. Some of them, and Becca can go over this as well too. We can pick any one of those though, and I know that they exist in some people's practice, like you can't treat if your treatment goes across a waterway. So for those of you that treat by phone, you might treat by phone. Some people that treat by phone say they can treat by phone, but just as long as it doesn't go across a waterway. And some people say, no, that's not how it works at all. So I'm talking about this is a kind of rule that is representative of some people, but it's a variation, and other people might not follow it. So there's some variation in these things. Now, religio magic, yeah, there's a strong dose of religion in there, and there's some magic going on too that's not clearly recognizable as standard religious practice, possibly. Let's see what that might be. Well, the holy cards, you know, the Catholic Church, in a way, sometimes they publish these holy cards. They have over the years, and someone decides, you know, what the image is and what the prayer is, and all of that is part of tradition, and it's part of Catholic and Christian tradition, and it's put out there. But what the Catholic Church never did say, usually, they never did give you a guidebook to say, now if you take this card and put it in the corner of your room, what is that card going to do? What can you do with that card? But there's some people that use things like this. They're holy, and they're used in certain ways sometimes to cure. And so some people use items like that. The string, for example, is not, of course, is not religious. The cordon. Cordon is a string. The cordon But if a cordon is placed in the hands of a traiteur or a traiteur, you can look at it as a religious thing. If it has 9 knots in it, and each of those knots have a prayer associated with it, it starts to become a religious item. So, why 9? You know, did the religion ever say you must have 9 or 7? You can't have 6. No. The priest never said, all right, when y'all go heal, y'all go out and heal, but you don't say 4 prayers, but say 7 prayers. I don't believe the church ever did that. But there's some idea about numbers and how important they are. And it's part of tradition, and it's something that came down parallel with the church, perhaps, but not within the church. So this is the kind of thing that we might expect. The same might be said about holy water. So holy water is used in a lot of different ways for a lot of reasons. I met an Acadian in Maine one time who told me that his mother always had holy water, and a lot of it, and a quantity of it. Because when the weather would get bad, and up there they have a tempête de neige, you know, they have snow blizzards and all kinds of bad weather. When it would get bad up there, there would be more water falling inside the house than there was outside. So there's all kinds of things that can be used, and you know, if they could be holy, you know, but how to use them is part of a belief system. And then there's stuff that we might think of as the craft. Well, you know, the craft. So here's some items that people know about. It's knowledge that people have, and they know how to do it. But again, it's starting to get further away from some kind of religious teachings that we might know about. There might have been teachings from somewhere else, but for example, you know, to cure croup, you have a child wear amber beads. Okay, amber beads. These things here were all collected, by the way, in Louisiana. These ideas, these are beliefs that were collected here in Louisiana. When they were collected earlier during the 20th century, they were thought to be superstitions. Y'all know what a superstition is? It's something that you yourself don't believe, but somebody else does. If somebody else believes it, it's not a superstition for them, it's a belief. So these were believed by people in Louisiana and still are. Some of them maybe still today. So, you know, the business about horseshoes, the pan of water under the bed, night sweats. But I heard also it's not only night sweats, but what I collected was it's also this other thing that comes that would make you sweat at night. It's something that will make you sweat. Cauchemar. Or some other kind of things. There's an assortment of things in some people's mind, I'm saying, some people's belief system that can give them anxiety, that can give them trouble. And so here are some things. Is it religious? In a way it is. If you're dealing with the supernatural, almost has to be religious in some way or another. But we don't recognize it as coming from a standard religious tradition. Again, only 9 Grand de Mamou. You know, Grand de Mamou, that's a natural cure. I've got some pictures of it, we'll see it. The Mamou plant is a good cure, great cure. But again, you have to have a magic number of them to make it work. Where does that come from? Okay, candles, we're starting to see that, and this is a good example of what happened, I think, historically in Louisiana when there were strong treatments, traditions of treatment here already among the indigenous people in Louisiana. Then Europeans came and Africans came and other people from different parts of the world came, and they brought their own systems in here and to a certain extent, they combined. In some ways, they might have stayed separate. And so we see some separate practices today in different communities. It's possible to find that. But in a lot of times, they came together. And so we can't tell what the real origin of some things are. But right now, today, go into certain grocery stores and you see whole shelves of these candles right here. That process is not over. That process is still going on. So, as I pass them, well, maybe I'll buy this one. Lo and behold, I do have a couple of these candles in my house. Does that come from a Cajun tradition? I don't know, but they're written in Spanish. But they're Catholic. It might be Catholic. But some of them, look at this one here. The black. There's some symbols in there that are not Catholic. The Indian, look at the Indian. Yeah, there's a combination of things. And so that process is still going on. And we ourselves may be influenced by them, or any number of them. And of course, this thing is a good example. Is this traitement? Well, it's traitement for somebody, for certain people. It's the idea of like controls like. This is that ancient concept. If there's a doll that's in the form of someone else and that represents somebody else, if you do it to this thing, it's going to affect that person. That same kind of ancient tradition, in a way, is involved there in some way. Does it still exist outside of gift shops in the French Quarter? It does. Still does exist. And they may think of it as traitement. Now, in this way, negative therapy. So you might have positive therapy is going to heal someone. You might have a negative therapy that does the opposite. That's possible in some people's ideas, some people's system. And there's talisman. We don't even think about it sometimes, but look at that. How many of you have ever carried a fava bean? I carried one in my wallet for a long time there until it wore my wallet out. I'm not going to carry that anymore. It's, tear up my wallet. But it might have saved my life. I don't know. The Italians like the fava beans. You'll see them on the St. Joseph's Day altar most of the time. And then some people that carry it, they'll take it with them. Talisman, the idea of talisman. I have a very good friend who's a Homa Indian. One day we were talking, and so we started talking about our holidays, what they do for holidays, what we do for holidays. When it got to New Year's Day, I said, well, New Year's Day, the most important thing has to do with food. We have to have black-eyed peas, and we have to have cabbage. He was shocked. He said, you have to have cabbage? Well, we have cabbage too. I said, well, that's not so unusual. Everybody in the South has to eat cabbage. He said, oh, no, we don't eat it. On New Year's Day, our mother breaks off a little piece of cabbage, wraps it in foil, and we put it in our wallet and carry it all year long. That's a talisman. That's a good luck charm. It has to do with health, too. But they had a different idea of therapy. Us, we have to eat it. Then we're going to get money, We eat cabbage, we're going to get money, Never has worked, but so maybe it works better carrying it around. But anyway, so talking about the variation that we might find. Okay, now there's a whole range of remedies, and some of them, and lots of them are plant material. And again, they might be used in conjunction with prayer, and there might be some religious ideas, spiritual ideas connected with plants, or there may not be. Maybe it's a practical, functional thing for some people. They know that one plant does this, that's going to help somebody. And that's possible. I have for a while been doing research on trying to find out where the, not only what sort of plants are used in Louisiana, but where does the knowledge about that plant come from? And there's a lot of evidence that the Indians knew plenty. And so here's one source right here, Lepage du Prats. He lived with the Natchez Indians way back in the 1720s, and he wrote down what the Indians used for cures. And let's see what kind of things he wrote down. See if you recognize them. Frêne piquante, the toothache tree. He called it bois d'amourette in those days, but clearly he was talking about the prickly ash. And this is something that a lot of people around here know about. And you can take the leaf or or even a branch maybe, or a leaf, and you can put it in your mouth and it's going to numb it in case you have a toothache, or it'll numb the feeling. The Indians had that. They knew about that. Here's one that we go by every day, and we probably don't think of it as a medicine. The Indians thought it was the most important medicine they had, the copal, the sweet gum tree. We put it as an ornament in our yard sometimes, and the little kids take the balls, and have wars with them. I know that. But I didn't grow up thinking of it as a medicine, but it was for them, especially the sap, the gum that comes from it, was a very important medicine for them. They had medicine to treat snake bite. And there's been some other work since then. Here's a fellow, Frank Speck, who came to visit the home in the 1940s. 1941, he collected 73 curatives from the Homa at that time. So there the Indians were knowledgeable at first contact, and then a long time after that, in the 1940s, they still knew plenty about plants. Here's Miss Marie Dean from down in Dulac. She makes baskets with palmetto, but look what Frank Speck found out the Indians did with palmetto. Palmetto was also for eye trouble, for kidney trouble, high blood pressure could be used also. So those things were known in the 20th century. Here's another work that was done in the 1940s. There seemed to be a lot of interest in the 1940s, people going around and visiting among groups of Indians who were still around at that time and inquiring about what kind of medicines they used. So Taylor went around the southeast and collected 185 different plants that they still had knowledge of at that time. So anyway, the evidence for knowledge coming from the Indians is strong. It's very strong. And we have this evidence. We need to follow it up and see if it still exists out in the world today. Some of it does. The mamu was something that was collected from the Indians, and information about it was available from researchers. And this, by the way, done by Dr. William Reese, is a little, kind of a sliver of a publication. It's not very thick, but it's one of the only scholarly works in this whole field in Louisiana about Louisiana folk healing plants. And he actually studied the effects of mamu. What were the constituents of it? What might actually help physiologically in the body? And he studied the folklore of it too. So he knew that you had to have 7 or 9 seeds. So he combined that too. We need a lot more such studies in Louisiana on a lot of different plants that we should. Here's one that I can't find any academic work, any scholarly or any pharmacological work on at all. And it's one that a lot of Cajuns and a lot of French speakers know about. So, Zabamalo. Zabamalo. Some people are saying, yeah, because they heard that my grandmother knew that. She knew what that was. It was a great cure. The Indians also had this as a medicine. What could it do to help us today? But we don't know what's in it. We don't know physiologically what it does, but there's a lot of confidence in it in certain people's mind. Of course, elderberry is better known by more people throughout North America. Elderberry, the leaves sometimes, the flowers for sure, and very popular. The Indians used it too. Here's one, horsetail, that is a medicine for some people. Down by Lafourche, I've talked to people who would use it either for skin problems or also upset stomach could be used. If you ate that, you would have an upset stomach because it's like sandpaper, for sure. Like controls like, maybe. And of course the maypop. What's the French word for this? I've been looking for it. Grenade, eh? Grenade. That's one French word that we use for it. Why do people think it's important? It's beautiful. We eat the maypop. Some people eat the fruit of it. It's something to eat. You can collect out of the wild. It also has medicinal qualities to it. And some people think it has spiritual meaning as well. So all the various parts of it, look what some people have come to understand. That it represents, that's why it's called the passion flower, because it represents the passion of Christ. And so for some people it has strong spiritual meaning, and all the parts of it have these symbolic connections. Here's one that my grandmother knew about, and we see some people have knowledge about it, but often thought of as a weed, mullein. It was used all up and down the Mississippi Valley, by the way, by the French people who came here, all up and down, all the way to St. Louis. They were using this for breathing problems. Here's one. See if anybody knows this one. Tête cabri. Tête cabri. This is one, and there's a whole bunch of them that we might think of as today as obscure. They're on the margin of being forgotten about, and there are fewer people that know about it. But there are some people who use it. And by the way, the active ingredient in here must be croton oil. That's what is in here. And croton oil was something that most physicians of the 19th century carried in their bag. Croton oil. It was, by the way, called a counter-irritant, which is an interesting idea that might be connected with this like controls like business. A counter-irritant is something that you would take if a cow had a sore and bad place on its leg. You'd rub that on there and it'd burn them like heck. Burn them. But when it stopped burning, it would cure. So that same kind of principle there is being used again. Who knows what this one is? Monglier. Somebody says it differently? I've heard about 18 different ways to say it. Monglier. And there's another one that you can't find, or I can't find in the literature of pharmacological research, any information about it. But a lot of people have confidence in it. And some people called it, apparently, at one time, consumption weed. Consumption is tuberculosis. So it does things for congested pulmonary problems, you know, a lot of congestion. It'll take that congestion out. For fever. There's an Indian lady from Grand Bayou telling me about Mongo. How about this one? Anybody recognize it? So, Mexican. Ever heard of it? Mexican. I've collected information from Cajuns and from Indians, and I'll show you in just a second from Creoles of color who use this for various things. In the Philippines, it's used for all kinds of problems. The same plant, apparently. They use it for diabetes, to control blood sugar. So there's no telling what we have in our neighborhood that could be of very good use to us. Now, to end my little talk, and we'll turn it over to Becca, who will tell you the real story about Traitement. I would like to introduce this one resource that Becca turned me on to herself, and she came into her hands through mysterious ways, mystical ways, but it's a thesis of a fellow that lived in St. Martinville, Mr. Charles Bienvenu, who lived up until 2007, died at 101. He must know something about Traitement. Lived for 101 years old. When he was studying French at LSU, he wrote this thesis to study the Creole language. And his informants that he worked with were along Bayou Teche. They were from St. Martinville to Breaux Bridge. A lot of them were in Breaux Bridge, there's some in St. Martinville and Parks and along that area. So he went to, and what he did, he went and collected recipes for treatments from them. And that's what his whole thesis is about. And we're just now beginning to analyze it. It's sat over at the library in Baton Rouge. I don't think anyone had ever checked it out since 1933. And when we found out that it existed, lo and behold, the man was still alive. He gave us permission to copy it, and so now we have a copy, but there's a lot of things to learn from it. Just a couple of examples. There's no English in his thesis. It's all in Creole. So this is actually what he collected in the best way he knew to write it from what he was hearing. So here's one. And some of the treatments are just plant curatives. They're those that would fall on the remède side of that continuum. That's what they are. And here's one. Pour la fièvre, for fever. Tu fais un de thé avec fleur sirop et tu bois ça. You make a tea with elderberry flowers and drink it. Oh, that's going to cure fever. So that's an example of some of the kinds of things he was collecting along Bayou Teche. Some of them, that's what I call religio magic. Take a look at this one. Okay, pour arrêter un nez saigné. So if you have a nosebleed, this is what you do. Tu casses des petits brins balais et tu mets on la croix sur la tête, juste en haut sur front. Okay, so what he's doing, he's breaking these little pieces of broom straw, put them in the form of a cross, and put it on top of the forehead. Now, what is it that stopped the blood? Is it the straw? Is it the place he put it? Or is it the cross? And was the connection between cross and blood, or blood stopping, or what it was? But you had to have straw. You had to have the little pieces of straw. This is kind of traitement. These people were all of them were black people that's why he called it the Negro dialect. That's what he was studying at that time. Some of them had to do with magic numbers. Okay, so here's one. L'Abalapis. This is what. This is the poison ivy. That's the poison ivy. Okay. Il faut tu vanter toi 9 fois avec les des portes d'un armoire debout et dans les portes. So you get in the armoire, stand up in the armoire, and you close it 9 times. Now, I picked that up in St. Martinville when I lived there in the 1980s. I had people tell me that. That's the way to do it. So it persisted at least to the 1980s. And it was a white man that told me, not a black man. Okay. And some of them did not have to do with plants at all. Was this one tetanus? All right. Pilet de rave. Pilet de rave est mélangé avec la graisse de cochon. All right. Graissez, pilez-la bien avec ça. Si son mouchoir bas, fais un thé avec des ravets et ajoutez un petit peu de whisky et donne-les boire. Okay, that, so if his jaw dropped a little bit, because it's locked jaw, then you could make a tea and put some whiskey with the roaches, just so you could get it in there. Now, where did that come from? Here's a black Creole that's saying this. Did it come from Africa? Did it come from, it was in French. Did it come from France? Is it Indian? Thanks to my friend Jim Delahousie, we have not the explanation for it, the answer for it, but another confusing bend in the story. Look at Miss Cecile Robin, or as she says, Robin, from Saint Bernard below New Orleans. She has a bottle of whiskey roach. She had at the Jazz Fest, telling people about it because that's how she knew to practice healing. Whiskey and roaches. And so she has the little story about what to do and how to do it and what it was used for. For tetanus, she had the same idea as this person that Mr. Bienvenu collected information from Bayou Teche, who was a Creole speaker back in the 1930s. But Ms. Robin it belongs to a community that's Islanos. They're Spanish. There's still Spanish speakers there. And they came during the 18th century, about the time the Acadians came, and they have this idea about roaches too. So who is Miss Robin, who really says her name Robin, but who maiden name is Jones? Cecile Jones. Where did it come from? Nobody knows. But somehow it spread all over South Louisiana, and it's a good example of how traitement, I believe, is not really necessarily associated with one particular heritage, but it crosses over heritage lines, racial lines, linguistic lines, and it spreads like that. It can be found in a lot of variety with a lot of different people. Okay. Is that what y'all thought traitement was? Yes, sir.
Missouri Botanical Garden says there are more threatened plants than animals. All those plants that you just showed us, how many would be threatened?
The plants themselves, undoubtedly there's a lot of threat. Most of the plants, by the way, this is my own theory about healing plants, is that they are found in marginal areas. They're found on fence rows. They're found in a new clearing, wherever the ground has been cleared and something comes back. Usually they're called weeds. And we try to exterminate them. And so if we can't kill them all, then they'll pop up. But since we have this idea of trying to kill all the weeds, dandelions, anything we can, kill them, get them out of our yard, yes, I would say that they are endangered. And most of them probably are. Okay, I thought you were going to give me some trouble. You promised me you would. Okay. Now, you know, all of this stuff is a kind of a conjectural story about what traitement might be, you know, and it's so complicated that I have to say that maybe, if, perhaps, and all of that. We have some evidence. We have plenty of evidence. We have a lot of research to do still yet, and a lot of it in Louisiana to do. There's another side of this picture, though, and that is from the point of view of the practitioner. And the practitioner, the one who actually heals, has their own, not only their own belief, but their own feelings and their own understandings that any amount of research I might try to do in my inquiry may or may not get to. Fortunately, today we have with us a number of practitioners who heal. And one of them is Miss Becca Begnaud. She's a graduate of UL, so she got some education. She's one of my students, so I know she had a fine education. And but she also is very interested in a number of different kinds of healing, and particularly traitement, as she would recognize it. Becca, would you like to?
Our Lady of Lourdes Hospital. And one of the nuns there said, I think you should look into healing work. I thought she was crazy. She thought I could walk on water. But I couldn't tell her anything. I couldn't be sassy to the nun. She was taking care of me. I might be crazy, but I'm not stupid, you know. So I thought about my grandpa at that time, because Gros Pop was a traiteur. And I remembered I was about 10, and I had a sunstroke. And I just knew my mama was going to fuss at me because I had gone without a hat all day. And isn't a mother's job to fuss? I mean, it's one of my things I like to do. And she didn't fuss at me. Instead, she said, oh, that's okay. Gros Papa's going to come treat you. I didn't know my grandpa was a traiteur. I didn't know if he was going to treat me good, treat me bad, or buy me a treat. So I just kind of waiting for Gros Papa to come, wondering, you know. When he came in my bedroom because I was in bed, and I really didn't feel good. When you have a sunstroke, you have fever and a headache. And Mama had drawn a basin of water, and he ran his hands through the water, and he ran his hands through my hair, kind of like that. And he said some prayers in French. Well, I wasn't afraid of this old man because he was my grandpa. But a lot of people that I have talked to at Vermilionville have been afraid of the treaters because they didn't know them when they were children. So after Gros Papa treated me, and he and Mama were drinking coffee, and I'm sure he was rolling his own cigarettes and spilling tobacco all over the floor because he did that, I wanted to go play. About 5 minutes later, and I was fine. And that thought came to me, that whole scenario came to me while I'm in the hospital at Lourdes, and I'm thinking, well, hell, if Gros Papa can, I can too, right? And the nun who had shared this with me had learned something called Reiki, which is a modality of healing that we get from the Japanese people, the Japanese culture. And so I looked into that, and I studied that, and then I studied healing touch, which is another kind of healing. And then one time when we were at the hospital and a group of healers had met, one of the ladies asked me if I was a traiteur. And I said, well, no, my grandfather was, but I'm not. I don't know that he gave his gift to anyone, but he didn't give it to me. And he died of an aneurysm when I was about 12, so. Oh, she said, would you like the prayer? Well, I want y'all to know, I'm not an angry woman. But a lot of things kind of like tick me off. I didn't want to get the prayer from this lady because I know that I'm supposed to get the prayer from a man because the rule says so. So if you have the gift of healing, a woman passes it to a man and a man passes it on to a woman. So why should I say yes to a woman because she's not a man? You know, that would be breaking my tradition as I know it. And so I said, Yeah, sure. Because I wanted the prayer. Okay, so then she gives me the prayer, and the prayer she gave me was these words, and it said, parenté sur parenté. Well, I knew some paradans, and I know some parakeets, but parenté didn't mean anything to me, and it was spelled P-E-R-O-N-T-E. And she wrote it down. You're supposed to not write it down. And I couldn't tell this lady, who was one older than me, and giving me a sacred prayer that had been passed down from generation to generation, that it was wrong or it didn't make sense. But I knew, but I didn't say anything. A couple of years later, I got some prayers from Franz Amelinks, who taught at the university. He put a little sticky note. It was the prayers of Mr. Nestor Guidry. And he said, have fun with this. I got ticked again. First of all, that man's not supposed to have those prayers. He's not a traiteur. Second of all, he's not supposed to give it to me because he can't pass it down to me because he's not a traiteur. But most of all, how did he think I could have fun with some prayers? That was almost sacrilegious. But I was really glad to get them. I got over it fast. I'm flipping through these prayers, and I see one of them is a prayer for sprained ankles. And the prayer the lady gave me, she told me, could be used for everything, but it originally had been for sprained ankles. And so on this prayer from Dr. Amelinks, it said, Je suis parent, je suis parent, je suis parent, je suis parenté, je suis parenté, je suis parenté, which means we are related. It said it 9 times, that number that Dr. Brassieur was talking about. And Native Americans always pray about all their relations. And the word Catholic means universal. And we know by cause and effect that anything I do is going to affect someone else. So this prayer just seemed to be really perfect, and it made sense. But when he was asking what makes something heal, it wasn't the words in this case, because the words she gave me were different than the words that had been originally passed down. And when you learn Reiki, you learn it from a master, and they give you these symbols, and they're sacred. And the lady says, put this where nobody else can see them. I'm sorry to tell y'all, I'm not ashamed, but whatever. I'm not the most organized person in the world. I couldn't find them myself, okay? To this day, I don't know where they are. But I still did the work, and the people still receive whatever it was that they needed to receive. So it's not in a symbol either. Where does it come from? I mean, I personally, I believe that there's a sacred space that comes and happens between two people, kind of bringing the where 2 or more are gathered. It's all about the intention in your heart. But with the Cajuns and other people who were agriculturally based, they also did this with their animals. I have a brother who trains horses, and we were talking one day, and he goes, you know how we have those reflexologies and our points on our hands and our feet? He says, the horses, they have it in their tail. I thought that was cool to know. So one day, my friend who works with horses called me. She goes, I want you to come treat one of my horses. Okay, I'm going. So I told her, I said, George says if it works in their tail. So one of her horses, I guess he was slow. His eyes were all messed up. My mama used to say, eat my dust. And when the horses in the front run fast, they throw dust on the person in the back. It's not just the car on the gravel road. So this particular horse had gotten a lot of dust in both of his eyes. Now this is a thoroughbred. So I'm standing at the half gate, and I'm doing this in front of his eyes with both my hands. And the horse just stood still. And I'm looking at my friend, and she's looking at me like, I don't know her horse. I never met her horse. But animals have this instinctive something or other, even though they don't go to church and they may not have a faith base, all right? So then I go to the next horse, and he comes to the door. Now, she's not pulling these horses to us, and she has no food. They're just doing this. And she and I kind of like were like, phew. We were pleasantly surprised. So the next horse comes, and he faces like this to me at the door. He's kind of sideways. And she told me that it was his front hoof. So I laid hands here because the energy or the love or God is smarter than me, and it knows where to go. But the horse was giving me he was presenting to me what was the closest thing to his injury. So there was another horse. I don't know what was wrong with any of her horses, and she never told me, except the first one whose eyes were messed up. So this other horse comes, and he looks at me like this, like I'm looking at a horse, right? And then he turns around. And he stayed like that. So I just laid hands on his tail. So he's just doing this, I have my hand on his tail. Then he turns around and he looks at me, and he makes a complete circle, and he gives me his tail again. And he stayed there until he evidently had enough of whatever it was he needed. When I tell people it works on animals, it adds another thought to how does this really work? Maybe animals are smarter than us because they don't have to get over their faith to believe. I don't know, but that's a whole other, it's just something else to think about. I sometimes give presentations at the Miles Perret Center, which is for cancer survivors. And when I was there, a lady asked me, she says, I have something I think you may be interested in, and that's when she gave me Mr. Bienvenu's, his thesis. It was written in 1933. So sometimes things just come to you, and then later on you figure out what you're supposed to do with them. And so I was really glad to share it with Dr. Brassieur, who had the ability or the knowledge that we could get a copy. And I was so surprised when he was still alive. I mean, hello, he was way up there. So there are a lot of things that we gather and we can use later. There's also a lot of things we can learn about and gather now. I don't actually believe that, like Dr. Brassieur said, healing doesn't belong to anybody. And there was a time in this country when we were all more connected to healing plants and to being sick and to nursing someone, which took time. That was before managed care, And those were real important things that seemed to have gone by the wayside because we got sterile. We created hospitals, which are really good, but they didn't necessarily improve on everything that we had going. But we kind of turned our backs on stuff that may have been working to go for something we could put greater hope in, like, the vaccines. Maybe we thought we could wipe everything out. But sometimes when you get sick, you just got to be sick. Sometimes when you get sick, you just got to let it run its course. And that's the only thing you can do sometimes. And that seems to be part of what we kind of turned our back on. People used poultices. People used other than roaches to make you feel better. This whole roach thing is like, well, with all the pesticides we have, I don't know if that's really cool today, but when you are looking for plants, you also have to see who poisons and how often they poison on the roadside. And if you're going for gathering plants, that you would try to do that in an area that might be far from the road, a little bit further in, more in an isolated area, so it wouldn't be quite as contaminated. I made a handout, but I'm going to share a few of the things that are on my handout with you. We only made 20, so if you need more, Michael will take your name and email and then be able to send it to you later. If you have an email or some kind of way, they'll be able to get you a copy. Some of the research I did, I'm not a big researcher, okay, but I did do some, was finding about what happens at the point of transmission and finding about some of these rules. So I interviewed traiteurs, and yeah, basically more than not, a man passes it on to a woman. One thing that was true across the board was you always had to pass it to someone who was younger. We got that. But then there were also people who, like the lady who gave it to me, said she could give it to anybody and to as many people as she wanted, as long as they were younger. So she didn't have a gender control or gender option. She was free to give it to anyone. That's how it had been given to her. There's another gentleman who said he too could do the same thing, and he just wanted to see how many people he could give it to. I just thought that was it was wonderful. But this is another thing that I learned here at Vermilionville. There were some young people who'd go through, and I would ask them some questions, or they would tell me some things, and it was like they never got the prayer. But they did what they could remember their grandma did, and it worked. So if your daddy was a carpenter, and your mama was a seamstress, and maybe they died before you were born, it's in your genes. Could this not be in our genes? Can't we all have it? I don't think it's relegated to a few. I think like when I thought the nun was nuts, that we all think we're not good enough, we're not capable. My grandpa was a traiteur, but he wasn't a perfect man. He was a good man. I don't know anybody that's perfect. One of the traiteurs I got to meet over the years was a man from Carencro who's not living, and his name is Mr. Kidare from Carencro. And from what I can understand, he had a bar/grocery store right next to his house. Okay, now, he saw a lot of life. So being a traiteur doesn't make you have to live as though you've taken a vow of, I'm not going to have fun anymore, or a vow of poverty. But most healers in any culture that has healing, either as a medicine man or a medicine woman, they don't take money either. Part of the reason we could do that in this culture is because we lived in a community. That I may not have paid you for sewing for me, but I may have given you some pies I baked, and you may have shoed my horse, and I may have sewn for you. And so there was a whole lot of bartering going on. So oftentimes that a traiteur wasn't paid doesn't mean that during the year somebody didn't drop something off on their steps. And they got something when the pig was slaughtered, when they made boucherie, when the crops came in. But today, a lot of people are learning these modalities and adding them to, like as a counselor. So then there's a fee. Well, I'm here to tell you, if you don't have a fee, you can't make a living as a traiteur. Okay, I had 3 offices. One lady and I trained together in Healing Touch. She says, oh, why don't you have an office with me? I said, okay, cool. She wasn't going to charge me anything, but you know what? I still didn't make any money, right? How are you going to make money if you don't charge anything? So then my friends, they have a alternative home care. I'm working for them again now, but they also had office space. They said, oh, come, we'll give you an office. Well, it wasn't that beneficial. But every time I had an office, I had fun, and I met a whole bunch of people, and it was wonderful. It was not financially beneficial. And then this other time, this friend of mine who does fascia therapy, myofascial release, she had an office, and I was in an office with her. So I'm here to tell you I'm happy, but I'm not rich yet. But the whole thing about traiteuring is you don't say thank you. Why do you not say thank you? Well, some people say it won't work, or the treatment will go away. Basically, I think you don't say thank you because the person's not God. It was a way to remain humble. Humility is a real big part of being available to people and praying with them. You don't always know the results. One guy who was talking about traiteurs once, he says, look, somebody gives you prayer and you treat the people, and if nobody gets better, then just find something else to do with your time. Okay? So we have I don't do surgery, so there's nothing wasted in praying for someone. I want to go over some of these little handouts. And I guess it makes me happy to know that we all can break rules. I was canaille when I was born. The traiteur, oh, here's what else I wanted to say. Traiteurs, someone told me that. I don't know how to say this. Let me think for a minute. Okay. There isn't a feminine version of the word traiteur. Because back when, is there a feminine version of the word doctor? Or avocat? There's no feminine for doctor and there's no feminine for lawyer. And there isn't a feminine for traiteur because it was a job and only men worked anyway. And I don't mean that in a tacky way, but it's just how that. You have something? We say traiteurs now, but that's a recent thing. Right, but is there a female for doctor? Okay. Anyway, someone told me that, so I wanted to, give a plug to George Rodrigue. Maybe he wasn't all bad. The traiteur prayer is never shared with anyone except the next traiteur who will use it. There's something about something being sacred. If I have something and it's sacred, I'm not going to share it with you unless I think you also will hold it in some sense of respect and with some essence of sacredness. People didn't go around saying they were a traiteur. But if someone needed you, everybody knew what you did because we lived in rural communities. When I was growing up, I know who sat in what pew in the church in Scott. Michael Doucet sat on the left in front of Mary. The Richards sat in the front and by St. Joseph. And I knew, you just knew this. Everyone had common knowledge. It's a community. And so no one had to advertise. No one had to say anything. And we served each other. I have another great-grandpa who used to set bones. Now, he wasn't a healer, but he set bones. And Mom said what he used to set bones was old pieces of sheet. And she said one time the people had brought their child to him, but they had broken this long bone, but too close to his hip, and he was afraid. So he gave them the money to go to the hospital because we took care of each other. They didn't have the money to go to the hospital. Even before money counted, this was the only way. After money counted, we still helped each other. So I think it's important to know how much of a community process the whole traiteur tradition is. It's a community thing. Unlike some people who would have a medicine man or a medicine woman, well, you would treat for earache, you could treat for sprained ankles, you could stop the bleeding, and on and on. So it didn't fall on one person. And I heard one story about there was this man who said he could stop the bleeding, and somebody didn't believe him. So they were butchering a pig, and they asked him to stop the bleeding. And nobody could eat the pig because the blood never came out. I think they all became believers. There's often a gesture that accompanies the prayer. Sometimes you have to circle it. Sometimes you make a certain number of crosses over it. So it's not only just a prayer. And sometimes it's the prayer that you receive plus the Our Father, the Hail Mary, or the Glory Be. Everything was in French because we spoke French. I don't understand why the people from the Canary Islands and the Spanish people and the German people spoke French. We all spoke French generally in this culture. Because that was the common language. So everything was in French, but, and that still holds true today. If you don't know French, you just memorize what they say, and you can say the Our Father, the Hail Mary, and the Glory Be in English if you don't know it in French, but the prayer itself comes in French. The gift wasn't passed down through the Catholic Church, and it was never part of its rites or the hierarchy. Although Catholicism was the official religion of the Louisiana Territory under both Spanish and French rule, until the Louisiana Purchase in 1803, it was against the law to be anything but Catholic. individuals who served as healers in their community kept the traiteur tradition alive. Somebody came here and asked, how the church felt about it, and, I actually know a priest who is a traiteur. And someone told me one of the bishops had said we should quit doing this. I mean, nobody asked the bishop if we should do that before he became bishop, and I'm sure nobody quit healing because he said that. And that's not really true. Some people may have. But it was of the people of the church. It wasn't a sacrament. It wasn't passed down, but it was honored and respected. One of the ladies that I interviewed told me that she doesn't treat anymore because her children didn't want her to. So she may have listened to the bishop if she had known that then. And I don't know why that would be. You do get calls a lot. You will be available. But evidently her children meant a lot to her, and what they thought and felt meant a lot, and so she quit treating because her children didn't want her to. The person who needed went to a traiteur whether or not he belonged to the same community. If you were Native American, if you were African American, if you were European American, if you knew a traiteur who treated for what you needed, you just went to them. And everybody respected everybody. If we all pretended we were healers today, we could have world peace. That's easy. No belief is necessary for the gift to work since it works on animals, but faith does increase the power. If you go to a doctor you believe in and you have faith in, you're going to do what he says. If you don't like him, or if you think he's kind of, I don't know, you just don't have a good feeling about him, you're probably not going to do what he says. Having faith affects how you behave. But so many people have told me they never believed. Like, okay, he broke a switch off of the peach tree and beat me all the way to the traiteurs. I was afraid of her and I didn't want to go, but she treated me and my warts went away. And that's from a child who shared this with me, or an adult who shared this with me as a child. A lot of children were brought to traiteurs, they were afraid. And like when my grandpa came to me, I had no knowledge of what he was going to do. They didn't either. They didn't have a belief. But the treatment worked. I don't know what that is. I don't know. It's not, I don't know. I don't think everything is for us to know. That's about all I have. The whole process is humbling because you're there to serve. The process is humbling because you actually know you can't necessarily do it again because you're not sure what you did the first time. I like that. It's mindless. I mean, you say some prayers and it goes away. Well, if you come the next day and say the same prayers, it might not go away. Why? You might have to come 3 times before it goes away. It's mysterious, but there's a way to do it. And I would like to ask anyone who may be here who is a traiteur if you would have a question or want to share something. I am not an authority, but one of my classmates said I was. I said, I'm not an authority on this. Oh, he says this. Do you know what you're talking about? I said, well, yeah. He goes, are you honest when you talk about it? I said, yeah. He goes, well, then, you're an authority. But, I don't have all the world's experience, but I am honest, and I do share what I know. And if anybody has any questions or anything they'd like to share, please, now's the time. Yeah, but they haunt. When I had a group at Vermilionville and we'd finish talking about something, everybody would leave and then one would hide behind and he'd kind of say, let me ask you about my uncle. My uncle, he used to blow in them babies' mouths. What you think that was? Now, you see, they'd never ask a question in front of the group because then the group would know he had a weird uncle or that he himself was weird. But, you know, you can feel that way here. I said, well, I think he's probably treating for thrush. You just don't blow in the baby's mouth for nothing. And he knew something was going on, but I think he was from Alabama. So please, I know I haven't covered everything. Yes. Do we ever use what bags? Gree bags? No. No, I don't. Wait, I'm going to an article. Thank you. I'm not used to walking in shoes, she says. It's really true, but I promised I wasn't going to take them off. This is an article taken from Wikipedia, which is by far not the greatest article on anything at any time, but it touched on the subject of voodoo. I don't necessarily even agree with what it says. We don't do gree-gree because gree-gree could be considered negative. But I have a cousin who's in his 80s, and when he comes for a treatment, he goes, oh, can you give me a gree-gree? Just to tick me off, because he knows I do that easily. It says here that the rituals involved with traiteurism are simple and time-honored, and they are careful not to transgress the teachings of the church. This aspect contrasts with Louisiana voodoo, which is centered in the city of New Orleans, away from the Cajun bayous. The methods of the traiteurs are purported to be able to work on a person regardless of faith, should one be so moved as to ask for treatment. I don't guess this really says anything. I gave a presentation once at Festival International, and there was someone there who said he was a descendant of Marie Laveau, and he said only 20% of what they did was black. I don't even know what a gree-gree bag would do. It may be a positive thing. Yes.